5 things that happened prior to World War II that still affect today's current events. Number 1, the Balfour Document. The Balfour Document was a document crafted by Lord Arthur Balfour on behalf of his interests for the Rothschilds. The purpose of the document itself was to create a Jewish state in Palestine, which essentially the English crown had no right to authorize. But they went ahead and did it anyway, essentially being promised by the Jewish interests that they would persuade America to enter the war on their behalf, which they did, and the rest is history. Number 2, the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was the document crafted by the European elite to end World War I. It was written by John and Alan Dulles of Sullivan and Cromwell. The document itself was written to end World War I, but what it was really used for was to put $135 billion of war reparation debt on the German people, a sum they would never be able to pay back. However, they weren't expected to. What was intended was that that debt would devalue everything in Germany to the point where the elite friends of the Dulles group could then swoop in and purchase up German industry on the cheap and then staff it with concentration camp workers rounded up by Hitler. They knew that this would happen because Hitler was both aggressive and expansionist, and he had an eyeball on the Jewish population. What most people don't realize is the depth of that population. He rounded up people to the extent of having 40,000 concentration camps throughout Europe, a network of slave labor that would never be imagined or seen since. Number 3, the 1917 Communist Revolution. The 1917 Communist Revolution. Everyone loves a little revolution. But our friends in Russia always seem to be creative with their revolutions and wars. So while World War I is going on, when you think your patriotism or patriotic feeling is at its highest, the Russians decided that that would be a great time to overthrow the government. So what happened was, with the help of the Bolsheviks, essentially they got tired of years and years of mistreatment, watching elites live a lavish life while they had hundreds of thousands of people starve every year. They decided that they had had enough. So they rounded up the Tsar and his entire family, shoved them into a room, and shot and bayoneted every single one of them, killing the entire family, even his teenage daughters. So that's what you get for not listening to your people at home. Number 4, the Great Depression. The Great Depression was a financial collapse that occurred from 1929 to 1939. It happened when the heads of the big banks, mostly J.P. Morgan, began spreading rumors that the small local banks were insolvent. This created a phenomenon known as a bank run, which was a panic caused when people believed that their bank had gone bankrupt and they descended on the banks en masse to retrieve their funds. This practice came to a head when investors, influenced again by big bank rumors, attempted to cash in their U.S. bank bonds and were denied. This caused a massive financial freakout that led to the collapse of the American Central Bank. And thanks to the collapse, the same big bank interests combined to convince the United States government that they could prevent this from ever happening again, and this led to the creation of the Federal Reserve. It should be noted that the Federal Reserve is not connected to the federal government, and it works in behalf of its own interests. Good old American greed. Number 5, the Red Scare. The Red Scare was created when the communist people rose up against their czar oppressors and overthrew the elites. The scare itself, though, goes way deeper than that. It's actually a psychological problem with the elites of Europe that has somehow managed to make its way across the pond. The European elites were so horrified at the thought and the actual sight of the Tsar and his family being put to the bayonet that they've rounded up all of their resources and all of their friends to make sure that it never happened again, or at least didn't happen in their country. That's for damn sure. So what they did was they decided that they were going to dump all of their extra resources and cash on hand into the national workers' movement of Germany at the time, which at the time was a fledgling movement headed by Mr. Adolf Hitler. So essentially what the elites were saying was that they would rather get behind a fascist Hitler and all of the evils that that entailed than they would face the disrest at home from their own people and avoid the risk of having themselves put to the same fate as the Tsar and his people. So today, we still live under the same fear, even though here in America, have you ever seen a Russian plane or a Russian boat? There you go. 5 things that still affect life today that occurred prior to World War I. How about that?